Hello and welcome to another Reaconteur video, and in today's video I'm going over all of the information that we have in regard to verse 3. This includes layer 3, the Vow of Iron, divergences, and much more that I am very excited to see coming in the next presumably year or so. Now I actually already made a video covering verse 3, but two things, and the reason why I'm making this video is because first of all, I made that video before they released information regarding certain things like divergences and the Vow of Iron, and second thing, that video is mostly speculation. This video will be covering information that we already know and have. So make sure to subscribe, and also I'm live on Twitch. Come watch me on Twitch, where I'm live on Twitch because I'm live on Twitch. You gotta watch me on Twitch at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Mondays, Wednesdays, and some Fridays, but not this Friday, but I'm live on Twitch, and let's get straight into it. Alright, starting off with the big one, layer 3. I had initially forgotten, but in an old developer statement made by Archmage, it was stated that if layer 3 were to ever get added, then it would be open world, similarly to the overworld of Lumen and the first layer of the depths. And along with that, layer 3 is also directly accessible from the overworld as stated in lore, unlike the layers after it and unlike layer 2, which are only accessible through the depths, which means that layer 3 will likely be accessible through Miner's Landing via the resources and abilities of the Ignition Union, which they have in lore but not in game. Now, as for layer 3 itself, there's a lot of lore on it, and it is the layer where the Deepwoken, known as Pleatsky, resides, and it is also the layer where the lava serpent-like being known as the Coral Fiend rules over. This means that within layer 3, it is very likely that the Coral Fiend, or maybe some sort of scion of the Coral Fiend, is going to be a major boss similarly to the Scion of Etheron, who rules over the second layer, but we only fight their scion, which is kind of like the traces of their godly power. As for Pleatsky, seeing as how his nature is scholarly, it is likely that he will not be any sort of boss, and he instead will probably be some sort of lore NPC who will provide information and set you in the right direction or give you some sort of quest. Alternatively, he could take a similar role as Maestro Evangard, providing you with some sort of training after recognizing your strength, in which you actually do get to fight him, or at least a nerfed version of him where he isn't going all out, because if he did, he'd just kill you. This means that as far as I see, we could have up to 2 major boss fights, but given the fact that they can add any lore that they want to this, we could end up with more or just completely different fights from the ones that I listed as being possible here. But we shall see this in due time because the devs can get as creative as they want with this. For those of you who want more lore about layer 3 and to learn more about it as a whole so you're ready for when the layer comes out, I will not be covering that here because I already have an entire video on depths lore for those of you who are interested, so you can go watch that after this video. Anyway, then we have the Vow of Iron. Now when I made my initial video on verse 3, I didn't have the information that developers released on it because I made that video pretty much directly after the roadmap was announced. But since then, and since then I mean, you know, the day that my video dropped, they went ahead and told us about the Vow of Iron and divergences, both of which sound quite interesting. The Vow of Iron is essentially a starting modifier that will allow your slot to be locked into a hardcore version of Deepwoken, which according to the devs will have unique mechanics, loot, and even in-game encounters, which will reward you for playing on the harder difficulty. And along with that, it will even lock Vow of Iron players and slots into specified servers where you will only find other Vow of Iron players. Now, seeing as how there's going to be exclusive loot to the Vow of Iron, I'm interested in seeing if it'll just like translate and be transferable via the bank to non-Vow of Iron slots. Because if it is, then that just means that Vow of Iron could have a completely different gear meta than the normal game does right now, and that would be interesting to see because then people are going to be forced to play the Vow of Iron on PvE slots to farm for gear that they can bring onto their main slots, which could be a pretty bad meta, so I'm assuming that they're not going to make that possible. Along with that, I don't know how they're going to make the Vow of Iron more difficult. I'm assuming they're going to make like the Iron progression challenge by default, so you're not going to be able to help other players or drop items for other players and stuff like that. But then on top of that, they said it's going to be a hardcore version of Deepwoken, so I'm expecting to see buffed versions of enemies, but honestly, they could get really lazy with this and literally just give every enemy a damage and health up. But if they wanted to go down the cool route, they could add new moves to enemies, which would make them harder without artificially inflating the difficulty with stats. But we'll see how they do it. I'm honestly expecting them to just increase the stats of enemies and call it a day for the hardcore version of Deepwoken. Meanwhile, it's not actually harder, it's just more annoying because you're going to be spending more time fighting the same enemies. As for divergences, they will essentially be obtainable races, either obtainable variants of races or completely obtainable races, or divergences which would be kind of like divergences in the species or breed of the aspects, which are the races in game, I guess. Also, anytime I say the word breed, someone in the comments section comments the word breed with like 4 drooling emojis. Can we stop doing that? Anyway, this is interesting because we haven't seen anything in relation to them, and we aren't even sure what level these divergent races will be obtainable in, because they could be like Halotide, where they're just different versions of every race for it, kind of like how Capra has Aberrant Capra and then its Halotide variants, so it's kind of like the same race but 2 different things cosmetically. Or they could do it like Rogue Lineage, where obtainable races completely overwrite your original race and have different abilities and stuff like that. Except in Rogue Lineage, what I found interesting was that often when you obtain certain obtainable races, you'd still have the aspects of your original race for the rest of that character's life, making you a weird hybrid, giving you the abilities of your old race, but also giving you the new abilities of the obtainable race that you got. And then with every slot after that, having the new obtainable race permanently with no hybridization there. Although some races would complete overwrite all of your stuff immediately in Rogue Lineage, like Azael, there could be a lot of variance for what they do here. Or should I say divergence? Oh, I'm so funny, laugh in the comments. I know, I'm amazing. Anyway, along with the obvious addition of the Authority origin, the devs have stated their desire to make more immersive content and expand upon lore and interactions with factions, with stuff like, you know, more quests or just more interactions, dialogue, lore involving the factions that's actually in-game rather than just stated through books and stuff like that. So while the Authority is getting their origin, which is likely to come with a lot of major content other than just the origin, if they want to do it good, at least that's what it's going to be, because the Authority and the Central Authority are super important figures within the game's lore, and if they're going to make an origin off of it based on what's already in the game, and they're not really going to add anything major, like lore or bosses, then it's going to be a disappointing update in my opinion, because they could easily add so much stuff, and I honestly don't even think they should add the Central Authority origin until the Central Luminant comes out, because that's literally the origins of the Central Authority. Regardless, we could get a lot of major content like lore, weapons, maybe even a boss, and it would just end up being a whole major update revolving around the Central Authority. But we will also be getting other faction origins, which will be smaller updates that flesh out the existing factions that are underdeveloped within Deepwoken. The most likely example of this is Great Hive, which has been teased for over a year at this point to have an origin coming, with the devs saying they wanted to make a farming origin where you gained experience from farming with the Great Hive, with them even showing teasers of the farming system, which as far as we know doesn't even exist anymore, because we literally haven't heard of anything involving the Hive origin since the last time Conquest was still being teased. But as seeing as how the Central Authority origin is meant to be much larger than the other, you know, faction origins, it's unlikely that the Great Hive origin stays as what it is without major changes, seeing as how it still isn't the whole farming aspect, right? That's supposed to be the main form of progression. I think that the devs found that it likely just didn't fit the vision of the game as the devs initially intended, which led to them scrapping it. Alternatively, it's going to end up like the Ceramade Hollow Ignition Union origin, and it's just going to be an uninspired origin nobody really uses that'll end up being a fun gimmick for a couple of weeks before it's reduced into nothing, which would be quite disappointing, and honestly, I hope it doesn't turn out to that, because I think a farming origin could be quite fun and even somewhat relaxing if they just do it properly. But knowing the Deepwoken devs, they tend to half-ass things that aren't major to save their time for the stuff that really matters. So I'm really just expecting this to be an origin where you go around watering like 5 different plants, and then you could probably use those plants for alchemy, and then it'll be like a mini alchemy update with a bit of farming in it that you can use for progression, and then that'll be like the entire update. So honestly, I don't expect it to be anything impressive, and I just expect it to be kind of like an addition to alchemy, as well as a new progression route that nobody's going to use, because it's probably not going to be faster than whatever the current optimal progression is. And then of course there's a lot of speculative stuff, but I don't really want to cover any of that here. A majority of the speculation involving verse 3 is either lore stuff, in which I've covered in, you know, other videos because I've made a lot of lore videos, or it's not lore and it's basically all just theory. And this video was really just made to go over the confirmed information involving verse 3 and recorrect some things I said in my last video which were invalidated by new information that has been provided to us. The only speculative stuff I did cover is involving basic lore involving the third layer of the depths, but I am assuming most of you who care enough already know about the lore of the depths and can come to basic theories involving it on your own. But for those of you that can't because you don't know enough about the depths lore, I urge you to watch my lore videos. In fact, I urge you to watch all of my lore videos because I've done lore on the Luminance, I've done lore on factions, I've done lore on the depths, I've done lore on basically everything. And although I don't have the most detailed lore videos, I cover everything that matters, so they're an easier way to intake the lore in a more understandable way than other YouTubers who cover lore in more detail, who kind of get into the minutia of things that really don't matter that much. Regardless, I hope you all enjoyed. I've been working on my game quite a bit, and I'm ready to say that you guys might even start hearing some news about my game within the next few months. Anyway, watch me on Twitch and watch my live channel. Shout out to YouTube members of Tier 2 or higher, Green, Brick, Goobka, Highcard, Drizzy Drake Fan, and welcoming Philip, who recently upgraded to Tier 2. I love you dearly, Philip. Mwah. I hope you all enjoyed, have an amazing day as usual, and goodbye.